JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a story about a certain family and their struggles with a certain vampire and his minions. The implications of this series affect a universal scale, and in most cases, JoJo is often a serious series. But with all of those poses, the ridiculous amounts of blood and scenes, it's hard to take it seriously all the time. So in that spirit, why don't I give you a quick rundown of everything in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series in a totally serious and totally comprehensive video about the main JoJo universe. Get enough people to watch the video, and I just might do one for the other universe too. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you're subscribed, and with that out of the way, let's get into it. Time immemorial. People start existing. These people are in two different groups. There's the people who walk in the sunlight and live for very short periods of time. Then there's the Aztec vampires. Those are exactly as they sound, except they can also turn to stone. Due to this, we imaginatively call them pillar men, because they can turn into pillars and stuff. The ability to turn to stone is both a way of resting as well as a defense mechanism to the sun that they cannot walk around in. The pillar men eat the humans, and the humans, I guess, just didn't have a way to fight back because Hamon wasn't invented yet. Also, breathing is a JoJo reference. Now that you know, you can't unknow it. Welcome to the fandom. Due to the pillar men and women reaching near physical perfection, their birth rates start to fall off, and few pillar men are born after this. 100,000 to 8,000 BC. One of those few pillar men that gets born is named Kars. Kars hates being a pillar man, but loves it at the same time. He doesn't like being stuck living only at nighttime, and also thinks that the Pillarmen gene pool isn't dried up and they just need to learn to evolve. What does Kars want to evolve into? Everything. So he makes a stone mask that will awaken the latent evolutionary potential within him, but he forgets that his skull is thick and it only just pokes him in the scalp. Somehow, this still awakens some latent potential, and somehow Kars evolves to have metal knives stuck in his arms. He develops a light mode. He also discovers that by making humans wear the mask, it awakens their potential too, as it can get through their soft little skulls. It turns them into weaker imitations of pillar men that are called vampires. Despite this, they can still make zombies and cool down areas around them, leading to powers that most pillar men aren't displayed to have. Cool. Most of the pillar men are skeptical about this new form Kars has achieved, as it requires him to eat more humans than before not to die of starvation. Despite this, another pillar man named AC/DC is interested and goes and gets his scalp massaged by the magic mask and gets a heat mode, which disturbingly allows his fingernails and toenails to bend back and let blood vessels come out and squirt boiling hot blood at people. He also, for some reason, sews up his abs because I guess he likes looking like a tennis shoe. Also, the other pillar men attack Kars and AC/DC. It's either because they're eating too many humans or because AC/DC's powers disturb them as much as they disturb me. The pillar men decide that they need to kill these two with fire, but because apparently the masks have made Kars and AC/DC too strong, they completely wipe out the rest of the pillar men. The only ones they don't kill are the baby Wamu and Santana, who were born in the last 8,000 of the 100,000 years before Christ. Assuming that Kars and AC/DC predict the adorable fan art that will be made of their little family on Pinterest, they decide to adopt the two now orphaned pillar men. Also, just to let you know, because I forgot to mention it before, at about the year 50,000 BC, a particular meteorite would fall out of the sky in what would become modern-day Greenland. This meteorite is what eventually replaces Hamon and pillar men when Araki gets tired of writing Castlevania X Fist of the North Star fanfiction. It will come into play much later. 7,999 to 3,000 BC. Wamu develops a fear of people touching his shadows. Santana and Wamu have their own potentials awakened by the stone masks. Wamu discovers his hidden ability is wind. Santana discovers that his hidden ability is jello. 3,000 to 50 BC. Kars, AC/DC, Wamu, and Santana begin their search for the Red Stone of Aja, a super powerful rock that will be able to activate the stone mask and make it go through their skulls. Because Santana isn't very strong, they tell him that he has a super special mission, and that's to protect the stone masks they made. In actuality, this is their way of dumping Santana because Santana's jello mode is nothing compared to light, heat, and wind modes. Santana turns into a pillar and sleeps in a cave in Mexico for a long time. During their search for the Red Stone of Aja, they end up in Rome, where one of the Roman emperors possesses it. The pillar men decide to rob Bro blind, but guess what? Humans reinvent breathing and make sunlight with it, as if they were living in the Demon Slayer world. This causes WAMU, AC/DC, and cars a lot of trouble, but in the end they still kill all of the Hamon breathers, or so they think. The red stone somehow escapes them though, and the Pillamen decide to take up their idle animation by turning back into stone too. As it turns out though, the Hamon breathers weren't all dead, and they begin to propagate their ability, teaching people in Italy and people in Tibet. This breathing technique gets mixed in with karate. Through it, people can see the future, with this likely being one of the first recorded stands to ever appear in the series, that being Hermit Purple. 14th century to 18th century. Wind Knight's lot in England has its first recorded success of the 77 Rings trial, that being Winzalio, the Lion King. This Lion King becomes a legendary knight whose feats are not repeated by another until 62 years later, where Eichmann the Lightning King does the same. Apparently, Caingase the One-Eyed Man is another knight, who's then followed by Bluford and Tarkus. Turns out those two knights in Phantom Blood had more history to them that I didn't know about because I'm a dirty casual who only watched the anime. Shame on me. By the 1500s, there's an Aztec tribe that found the stone masks because Santana can't even do the one job Cars asked of him, and he wonders why he got abandoned by his family. Well, they start using the stone masks and eventually all die out because being a vampire requires lots of human sacrifices, and when that runs out, the vampire starves to death, I guess. Unless you're Dio, in which you just don't, for plot reasons. Anyway, in the mid-1500s, Tarkus and Bluford are both able to pass their trial, and Mary Stuart is born. About 23 years later, Elizabeth I has Mary killed, and her knights Tarkus and Bluford also get axed. Also, in 1783, Mikitaka the Alien is born, or we assume he was, but that is if you believe he actually is an alien, which I do. 19th century. A lot of characters from the series proper are born, including Speedwagon, Arena Pendleton, Jonathan Joestar, and our favorite gay vampire, Dio Brando. Dio is raised by a father and mother, but the mother dies. She tells him a lot about heaven when growing up, causing Dio to begin desiring how to get there. But he desires to do it on his own terms, so that leads to a whole arc. Dario, Dio's father, is a dirty drunk sot, and Dio hates him, so Dio buys poison and puts it in his father's food, making him die. However, before dying, Dario mentions that he had done a single good-ish deed that will give Dio a free pass in life. He bequeaths it to his son. As it turns out, Dario had rescued the Joestar family patriarch and his only surviving family member, Jonathan Joestar. George offers to do anything Dario asks, and basically writes him a blank check to go to the National Bank of Joestar, which amazingly Dario somehow doesn't waste. Dio moves in and proves to be a better son than Jonathan, who Dio abuses day in and day out. He eats better, pokes Jonathan in the eye, puts his dog in the furnace, and even kisses Jonathan's girlfriend. All of this together makes Jonathan very pissed, as I'm sure you can imagine, and so he socks Dio in the mouth. Dio gets a very unhealthy respect for Jonathan, which later will result in desiring to have Jonathan's body. And no, I mean literally becoming Jonathan. As it turns out, the Joestars apparently like archaeology, and so they possess a sick mask. Can you see where this is going? After Jonathan's dad gets sick, Jonathan accuses Dio of attempted murder and even calls the cops, but Dio decides to become a vampire with the mask and kills everyone in the mansion except Jonathan and Speedwagon. Jonathan gets hurt real bad, but he beats the snot out of Dio even as a vampire and assumes he burns to death. Turns out he didn't burn to death and is eating many breads in London town right now. Eating breads is a euphemism for killing people and drinking their blood. During this time, he recruits Jack the Ripper and turns him into a zombie. Jonathan gets some breathing training from the karate Italian Will A. Zeppeli and decides to go fight Dio again. While he does, he has to kill Jack the Ripper without even dropping a single drop of wine, which he does because Hamon conducts liquids well. He then makes his way to Wind Knight's lot where he meets a kid named Poco who's a bit of a coward, but actually also really brave when he puts his mind to it. They have to fight Bluford and Tarkus, with Tarkus killing Zeppeli during their battle, but Zeppeli is like, "It's all good, Jonathan. I knew it was coming. Hamon can see the future." And then he gives Jonathan his final Hamon, which I think makes him stronger. Well, now Jonathan has a sword named Pluck and continues with Speedwagon until they meet the Tibetan monks who taught Zeppeli. Their names are Tom Petty, Dyer, and Straits. Yes, everything in this series is named after music, in case you didn't know. They make it to Castlevania, where Dio is, and fight their way in. Dio gets split in half with a sword, but it somehow doesn't kill him. Dyer gets wasted immediately, and Speedwagon stands in the background narrating, something that sort of becomes his thing. Jonathan hits Dio with a sunlight yellow overdrive, which supposedly kills him, but actually, it doesn't. Jonathan thinks everything is great and decides to marry Erina and goes on a Disney cruise to America with her, but uh-oh, that isn't Mickey Mouse, that's a soulless zombie. Turns out Dio is also on a honeymoon to America, but only he's there with Wang Chan and decides he wants Jonathan's body more than Erina does. After an epic battle with more zombies, Dio uses his laser eyes to stop Jonathan from breathing. The ship is totaled though, and Erina takes the baby she found with her named Lisa Lisa and jumps into a coffin that Dio, after taking Jonathan's body, also somehow manages to get in without anyone knowing. Erina is rescued though, and before Dio can follow her, he gets his casket sunk for the next century. 20th century. Turns out Erina was pregnant with a baby herself and names the baby George Joestar II. She raises the adopted Lisa Lisa beside him, and he ends up going the route of Sweet Home Alabama on us and marries Lisa Lisa. Well, maybe it doesn't entirely count as Sweet Home Alabama, but the point remains. He marries his sister. He ends up getting her pregnant as World War I starts and George joins the military. He gets eaten by his commanding officer, who is a surviving vampire from the era of Dio. Lisa Lisa destroys the officer but gets accused of murder when someone sees her do it. She leaves baby Joseph Joestar with Erina and goes out to get some Italian milk. Erina raises Joseph, and Speedwagon stays close to them when he moves to America as well and somehow becomes a rich oil tycoon. At one point in time, Joseph Joestar is on a plane with Speedwagon when it gets hijacked and crashes. Joseph crashing planes becomes a bit of a running gag. Never fly in a plane with Joseph Joestar. Speedwagon then meets up with Straits, the last surviving member of the crew they killed Dio with, and heads to Mexico when they heard that there might have been some more stone masks there. They find them, but uh-oh, Straits is insane and becomes a vampire. He wounds Speedwagon and throws him in a river. Speedwagon survives, but uh-oh, it's the 1930s and the Germans are becoming evil, and also they're in Mexico too. He gets captured by the Germans, who declare that their science is superior. I guess it kinda was, considering they made a cyborg in the 30s, but that comes later. Straits goes to kill Joseph Joestar since he's so good at Hamon breathing despite never having been taught. He underestimates Joseph's skills as somehow Joseph is carrying around a Tommy gun and grenades, which he's not afraid to use to light up a little bar like some mafioso. In the end, he defeats Straits, who would rather kill himself than be killed by Joseph, so he uses Hamon breathing as a vampire and basically self-destructs. Joseph goes to Mexico to rescue Speedwagon and ends up finding Santana was captured by the Germans as well, who are trying to wake him up. They sadly succeed, and Santana uses his Jello mode to escape and attack the command center. Joseph tries to play games with Santana, but Santana isn't having it and kills everyone but von Stroheim, Joseph, and Speedwagon. Von Stroheim has his body infiltrated by the Jello Aztec and tries blowing himself up with a grenade. Joseph then uses the power of the sun to defeat Santana, leaving him as a rock, which is then kept by the Speedwagon Foundation. Joseph eventually goes to Italy, where he is to meet with somebody because the Pillarmen are in Italy and about to wake up. He meets Caesar and then discovers the Pillarmen, Cars, AC/DC, and Wamu. Wamu says, "Awaken my masters," and the kick-ass song of the same name plays as they pose. Joseph then receives a wedding ring that doesn't go on his finger by AC/DC and Wamu. One ring goes around his throat and the other goes around his heart. They give him 30 days to become a strong warrior or the rings will kill him. Joseph panics and is taken to train with Lisa Lisa by Caesar, where he watches his mother bathe while saying, "Nice." I guess Sweet Home Alabama is hereditary. During their training though, AC/DC can't wait to fight Joseph, so he shows up early and amazingly gets his butt handed to him. For a while, AC/DC survives as a brain, but when the sun rises, he gets the opposite of a brain freeze. He's sunburned on his neurons. Bro dies. After this, they head to Switzerland because Lisa Lisa mailed the red stone of Asia she had there to protect it from AC/DC. But Cars knows about it and goes there too, where we see von Stroheim has survived, being reconstructed as a cyborg because, as I said earlier, German science is the best. Joseph manages to get the stone first, causing Cars to flee, but in the end he and Wamu hole up in an abandoned hotel. Caesar, being stubborn because his family name was impugned by the Pillarmen earlier, decides to go alone and gets himself killed. But he offers Joseph a blood bubble that has his final Hamon and Wamu's lip ring in it, which has the antidote to the poison left in him by the wedding rings from earlier. Joseph takes these things, but doesn't drink the antidote, saying he'll wait until he beats Wamu fair and square. They end up finding Wamu and AC/DC, but decide that instead of brawling then and there, they would instead make a spectacle of it in a conveniently placed coliseum nearby. While there, Joseph and Wamu have a chariot race and Joseph wins. Cars, though, turns out to be less honorable than his minions and just tries to take the stone from Lisa Lisa, wounding her in the process and using her as a tool against Joseph. Bro uses the stone to power his mask, which he then uses to become the ultimate life form. As the ultimate life form, Cars can walk in the sun and can transform into anything on Earth. However, this will make him starve even quicker to the point that he threatens to end all life on Earth. So Joseph steals a plane and lures him to a volcano where Kars pretty much humiliates Joseph. But Joseph shows that he stole the Redstone of Ajo when Kars wasn't looking, and when Kars tries to use a Hamon strike on Joseph, he strikes the stone instead, increasing the power of the blast into a super laser which pierces through Joseph's hand and into the volcano, causing it to kick both of them into the air. Joseph falls to safety, but Kars gets launched into space. Meanwhile, everyone is so sad because Joseph is dead, but he's actually still alive, and his new wife, Susie Q, who he met training in Italy, forgot to send the letter. After this, Joseph becomes a fairly successful real estate agent where he has 2 kids, Holy Joestar, who is his daughter through Susie Q, and Josuke Higashikata, who he has illegitimately with a woman half his age because he's actually a real bastard. During this time, Jotaro Kujo is also born, and he becomes suddenly possessed by an evil spirit, prompting Joseph to visit him. Speaking of which, we're now in the era of Stardust Crusaders. Yeah, this is where things really pick up because stands are superior to Hamon anyway. In the year 1984, a fishing boat discovers a casket, and Dio, who now spells his name in all caps for some reason, wakes up and eats everyone on board. 2 years later, while in Egypt, Diavolo, while part of an archaeological team, discovers arrows forged from a meteorite that fell in Greenland so many years earlier. These arrows can awaken stands, and he sells them to the witch Enyaba, who tells him what they can do. He keeps one arrow and awakens King Crimson with it, eventually creating a mafioso group a few years later. Enyaba brings Dio the stand arrows and she's like, "Stab yourself with this," and Dio's like, "Okay." And thus, Zawarudo is born. Doing this though awakens all of the Joestar family line stands too, including Holy Joestar and Little Josuke, both of who are too weak for it and start dying. Around this time, Dio starts learning how to achieve heaven, as if you could do such a thing, and makes a soon-to-be Catholic priest join a cult. He teaches said priest about gravity and heaven, and then gives him a toe, just in case. At some point during this time, it's a heavy snowstorm in Morio, and Josuke's mom gets the car stuck. A certain pompadoured boy shows up in the snow to help her. He looks just like a teenage Josuke, but is likely just a scrapped arc idea from Araki, probably from the Bites the Dust arc of part 4, but in the end, I guess he is canonically just a guy who looks like Josuke. Josuke fashions his whole look after the guy and awakens his stand, Crazy Diamond. Elsewhere, Jotaro, Joseph, Avdol, and Kakyoin decide to play a game of Where's Zawaldo and go to Egypt to kick Dio's butt. Along the way, they fight many villains and recruit Polnareff and Iggy. They make it to Egypt after some long travels and find Dio's mansion, but Avdol and Iggy get killed by another gay vampire named Vanilla Ice, who Polnareff only barely manages to defeat. Polnareff, Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Joseph face Dio, but Dio's stand has the power to stop time, and he uses it to kill Kakyoin and Joseph. Jotaro gets so mad that he plot armors all over the place and literally just steals Dio's whole ability and kills him with it in the most unsatisfying way imaginable. But because we all love Joseph Joestar, Jotaro uses Dio's blood to bring Joseph back to life. Somehow though, Joseph doesn't turn into a zombie or a vampire, though he psychs us out with it, playing a joke that only raised more questions than answers. They all then head their own ways. Eventually, Polnareff goes to Italy to find the person who had the last stand arrow and instead gets his lunch eaten by King Crimson, who thinks he's killed Polnareff but actually didn't. Jotaro at some point reads Dio's diary because what greater shame can you put on your enemy than reading their diary? Dear Diary, today Jenny G and Jenny R said that my stando Zawaldo is too tacky because it's gold. They said that gold is a weak metal and would get me killed one day, but I told them to step off. Then I headed out with Poochie to get a smoothie at the place down the street where I gave him my first bone. It was such a magical moment. We're BFFs now. Jotaro, unable to handle anymore, burns the diary. 1999, a very bizarre summer. You know what Jotaro does after defeating Dio? He does what any sensible man does and becomes a marine biologist. Meanwhile, Josuke is in high school and Yoshikage Kira is getting boners from looking at the Mona Lisa. Josuke's mom is hot, a direct quote from Okuyasu, and his grandpa is a police officer who gets killed by a serial killer with a water stand. Jotaro shows up to recruit Josuke and the two defeat this serial killer named Angelo, whom they fuse with a rock, creating the landmark Angelo Stone. There's a bunch of one-off adventures as people keep playing past the stand era, which eventually leads us to Yoshikage Kira, who just wants to live a quiet life where he can murder chicks for their hands. He kills Shigechi, which causes all of his friends to rage. Turns out Shigechi's friends were all the main characters, so Kira is screwed. They eventually find Kira, who in a moment of panic gets stabbed by the stand arrow a second time and awakens a new ability for his stand, which allows him to rewind time up to an hour if anyone who has the stand ability cast on them tells them his name. He casts this ability on a boy who discovers his identity and then follows the boy around because he can't help but flaunt this newfound ability over him. During this time though, Kira stupidly reveals his own identity, which Josuke hears, and because Kira said it himself, the ability doesn't count, and Josuke beats his butt. After a long battle, Kira confesses his love of hands to a paramedic and gets run over by an ambulance where he gets taken by hands ironically to a place where boners are impossible. 21st century. Giorno Giovanna is one of the many illegitimate sons of Dio. He's bullied and treated like crap by his adoptive father, but after this befriends the mafia and gets a good life, pretty much. One day his hair just turns gold and he develops a stand, Gold Experience. He also carries around a picture of Dio in his wallet, which I only assume he stole from his mom. Running around, Koichi from the last part is sent to Italy by Jotaro to look for Giorno. He finds him of course, but then becomes a background character that is almost never talked about again. Giorno ends up killing Leaky Eye Luca, or Leaky Eye Luca kills himself in a technicality, and Bruno, who had just gotten back from dealing with a stand user whose stand could predict the future, encounters Giorno Giovanna where he licks him to taste the lying salt of his face. Giorno beats Bruno in a battle and convinces Bruno to be his best friend instead and to betray the mafia. As it turns out, they both hate drugs, and the boss of Passion, Diavolo, is pushing him. So Giorno goes to Polpo to be recruited, is recruited, and kills Polpo with a banana. They then proceed to find Polpo's treasure to get the position of capo, which is basically captain for Bruno so they can get close to the boss. This works better than expected when the boss himself sends them to escort his daughter to him, which they do. However, before they can betray Diavolo, Diavolo betrays them and tries to kill his own daughter, who then joins Team Bucciarati in tracking down her father. During his fight with Diavolo, Bucciarati dies and then undies because reasons. They begin searching for Diavolo's past, which takes them to a small island called Sardinia. This results in the death of Abacchio, our favorite goth police mafioso. They're contacted by Polnareff, who tells them that he can beat Diavolo with a stand arrow, so they go to a coliseum after fighting a dude made of mold and a guy who swims in dirt. When they get there though, Diavolo also has made it, trying to get that arrow. What's so different about this arrow, you may ask? Well, I don't know, it has a beetle on it and gives your stand a stand, basically. Silver Chariot gets pricked by it and becomes Chariot Requiem and starts switching bodies around. Bruno becomes Diavolo, Diavolo becomes Mista, Giorno becomes Narancia, Mista becomes Trish, Narancia becomes Giorno, Trish also becomes Mista, Bruno's original body is dead, and Polnareff becomes a turtle. During this whole thing, Diavolo plus Trish unpurposely accidentally kill Narancia in Giorno's body, and Giorno then becomes Giorno again after fixing his own body. Turtle Polnareff tries to take the stand arrow from Chariot Requiem, but Chariot Requiem decides today is a good day to piss off PETA and attacks Turtle Polnareff. Mista, Trish plus Diavolo kill Chariot Requiem by destroying the hidden beach ball behind their head, and then Bruno finishes it off, returning everyone to their bodies except that Bruno's body is dead, so he goes to heaven instead. Polnareff doesn't return to his body because his body is dead, but because the turtle he switched with died with his body, Polnareff gets to stay a turtle as long as he wants. Diavolo tries to stab himself with the arrow, hoping to get a Requiem stand too. Do you remember that episode of SpongeBob where they're in a forest and Squidward keeps asking the magic conch shell if he can have something to eat? Yeah, that entire scene is basically how this is going for Diavolo, Polnareff, and Giorno. Giorno gets the arrow and receives Gold Experience Requiem, the most mysterious and powerful stand in all of JoJo. I don't care what Araki says. Star Platinum's time stop isn't beating Gold Experience Requiem's causality manipulation, especially since GER displayed he can move when there is no time, let alone when time is stopped. But I digress. Gold Experience Requiem decides that death is too good for Diavolo, so he curses him with immortality instead, but makes him live only in the situations where he would normally get killed, creating an endless death loop because Giorno is just as sadistic as his dad, I guess. Giorno then becomes boss of the mafia and makes a turtle his captain, so cool. 10 years later, a gay priest conspires to send an innocent woman to jail. Jolene Cujo, loving a dude with a fake AF name like Romeo, ends up helping him cover up for a murder, which actually does constitute a crime, so she isn't technically innocent, she just got a larger book thrown at her. The worst part though is that Romeo gets away with it because Jolene is a hopeless romantic with daddy issues. She awakens a stand by accident and calls it Stone Free. While in jail, she meets some others, such as a small being named Emporio, Hermes, Plankton, who was protecting the secret formula, i.e. souls in a John Deere tractor, a guy in a woman's prison named Anasui, and a guy with a funky hat whose name is the same as his stand, Weather Report. Together, they fight a bunch of inmates and assassins who are being led by Pucci, a padre who worships the wrong Dio. Jotaro tries to break his daughter out of jail, but Pucci steals his stand and memories as punishment for reading his boyfriend's diary. From here, Pucci desperately wants to have Dio's baby, so he takes Dio's bone and fills it with the souls of 36 sinners. In this way, Pucci gives birth to Dio's baby, and then tells it about rhinoceros beetles until it attacks him and becomes his stand. Also, Dio had other sons besides Giorno, and they all help Pucci fight Jolene, but all get defeated eventually. Jolene eventually breaks out of prison and flies to Florida because Florida is where the headlines read, "Florida man attempts to end world by achieving heaven." In Orlando, they try to stop Pucci, but Weather Report gets killed. They go to Cape Canaveral to fight Pucci, but he achieves heaven and kills literally everyone except for Emporio. The world resets and time speeds up to near the present. They end up back in Green Dolphin Street Prison, where Emporio leads Pucci into a room that was actually a stand ability. Emporio uses Weather Report's stand, Weather Report, which he got in the form of a stand disc, and uses it to put nothing but pure oxygen in the room. Pucci begins to choke on his own defeat as Emporio beats the ever-living snot out of the priest, killing him. And because he killed Pucci before time reset, a new timeline exists. Technically, I could stop here, but because Emporio goes to this new timeline and the events of it only really see a couple of scenes, I might as well tell it. In this universe, all of his friends are alive, and Jolene is there too, but her name is Irene in this universe, a reference to another manga by Araki. They all drive off into the sunset like it's a happily ever after, but not really, because everyone actually died. And Jolene isn't actually Irene, but was replaced by a totally new person. My question is, what in the world happened to Giorno? And that's the history of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I guess. What did you think? Do you love JoJo's too? If so, tell us about your favorite moments, your favorite characters, and your favorite stands. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when more videos like this drop. And while you wait for that, check out these other videos on the screen. I'm sure you'll like them. Until next time, peace out.